Welcome back, guys. My name's Shane. So today's video is something I thought a little bit of an explanation video in many ways. If you've seen any of my other videos about guitars, I always say, oh, this one ticks the boxes, or it doesn't really tick the boxes. Not that these both don't, they both do, absolutely. But what are the boxes? So there's 10 things that I really look for anytime I'm buying a guitar, new or used. Not all of them are deal breakers, and we'll get into that in the list. Let's get into it. Coming in at number 10 is something that I've grown to just love, and that's a balanced guitar. I take my hands off it and it stays in your lap with no strap or anything, no tricks there at all. Unlike, say, a Gibson SG, which has severe neck dive or neck tilt, that's something that's usually a bit of a deal breaker for me these days, even though I've owned Gibson SGs, and if I found one I loved, I'd probably still buy it. Yeah, I much prefer a balanced guitar over something that has severe neck dive. The reason why it does that is the neck material is usually thicker and heavier than the body material, and it's not well balanced. If you buy a Strat or a Telecaster or any number of other guitars, they're not going to tilt like that. So Gibson SGs, yeah, you know, if I found one I really loved, it's a maybe, but I wouldn't buy any other guitar than an SG if it had severe neck tilt. So yeah, definitely balanced guitars coming in at number 10. Coming in at number 9 is no sticky necks. Now this is a little bit hard to determine unless you've played the guitar for a while, so I always suggest anyone who's buying a new guitar straight off the shelf to go actually play it for a long time until you sort of get a bit of perspiration on your hand and make sure that it is still playable. Now I played a Strat recently that was super sticky along this edge of the guitar, and it was a complete deal breaker. It meant I would have had to have sanded it down to take some of that off. It was just way too sticky. Now this guitar actually has a pretty high gloss neck, but it doesn't get sticky. So for me, that's a win. And I also have some with lower gloss that also don't get sticky as well, but you never know until you play them for a while. So I usually make sure that if I do buy a guitar, it's something that now I don't have to just sand off as soon as I buy it. Number 8 is something that I definitely don't want on any guitar that I buy, and that's fake F-holes or missing pickups by design. Now, if you buy a used guitar and it's, you know, someone's gutted the electronics, that's a different story. But I don't want to buy a guitar that comes without the first 2 pickups and only comes with the 3rd one. There's designs out there like that, and the fake F-holes look ridiculous. I made a full video about that. You can check it out in the links in the cards. But overall, no gimmicks. Number 7 is definitely something I'm thinking about more and more. Any guitar I buy, I don't want it to have unnecessary toggle switches or weird type of pots or combination switches over here that toggle on 50 different options. Option paralysis is real. I'd much rather have a guitar sound great with a 3-way toggle switch than have a 6-way toggle switch and 5 different dip switches and none of them sound good, or maybe just one combination of all of that sounds great. So for me, simplicity is king. I love this 2 pickup design. 1 tone control would be my ideal setup on all of my guitars, and 1 volume control, and I'd be done. 3-way toggle switch on this one works a treat. This does have push-pull, but that's not something I always look for either. So I always leave that in the humbucker position, and I love this guitar for its simplicity, much like some of the others you'll see in this video. Number 6 is something that isn't always a deal breaker, but it is something that I'm looking for if I do find a new guitar, and that's just to find something different to what I already have. Now, that's not the case for a lot of people. I used to own like 3 or 4 Strats at one point, or 3 or 4 Telecasters. I've since culled the collection back, so I've kept the 2 that I play the most. And I feel that way about any guitar moving forward. If I do buy another guitar, it's going to be something that is very different to what I already have, or something to replace what I already have that's better, and then I'll end up selling the one that I've got. So that's not always a deal breaker, like I said, but if I am going to buy something now, to be a guitar type that I don't currently own, like a Strat. Now, number 5, something that I've learned more about recently, and it's something that I absolutely love on the guitars that actually have it, and that is if I'm going to turn the volume control on the guitar down, it's going to retain all the top end, which means it has a treble bleed filter in there, or it's also that the pickups are just inherently bright. So I love that, and that's not always a deal breaker because you can buy that part for next to nothing. I recently did a video on that. I'll leave a link up in the cards as well if you missed it. But I gotta tell you, this guitar in particular just sounds great with the volume control down. And I recently modded the Les Paul type guitar you just saw before, the Tokai, with a treble bleed capacitor, so it also allows me to get great tones at any volume. This guitar, man, it's absolutely beautiful, and the way that it sounds with the volume control down is what inspired me to do that to the Tokai Love Rock. Coming in at number 4 is something that isn't always a deal breaker either, but as I'm getting older and as I've played more guitars that are lightweight, I'm enjoying them a whole lot more than the heavy counterparts. If you were to give me 2 of these guitars, one at this weight, which is nice and light, and one that weighs as much as my Tokai, which you saw before, I would take the lighter guitar in a heartbeat. They're just way more comfortable to play for extended periods of time, and it won't sort of end up wrecking your shoulder after a 3-hour gig. So in my opinion, lightweight guitars, if you can find them, pick them over the heavier counterparts. It's just a better investment long term, especially if you're a gigging musician. Over to number 3, and this is maybe one of the most important things on this list, equal with the next 2 that you'll hear. So in my opinion, always make sure the guitar sounds great straight away. So if I'm buying a humbucker guitar, I want to make sure it's nice and bright. I almost want that Tele on steroids kind of vibe out of whatever guitar I'm buying. If it's a humbucker guitar, it should cancel the hum, but also still have enough top end that you can really get your tone out of it. If I'm buying a single coil guitar like a Telecaster, I want that neck pickup to have a little bit of a steely overtone and not so much of that woolly sound. Now, if you don't know those terms, that's fine, but think of a Strat neck pickup. If a Tele has that and more, you're in luck, and you should never change the pickups. You can go down such a rabbit hole with pickups and changing them out and hoping for the best, and sometimes you don't always get what you think you're going to get out of it, so just make sure the guitar sounds great straight off the shelf. Number 2 on this list is something that I always look for anytime I'm going to buy either a new or a used guitar, and that's non-traditional vintage frets. I want anything else. I can't stand vintage frets on the most part. Now, there are some sort of vintage frets that are smaller and slightly taller. They're okay, but I don't want the really, really small ones. They're just a mess and they wear out so fast. I actually had them on this guitar. It's my 52 reissue Telecaster. I've had this for a number of years and I had to get the frets replaced. I put stainless steel 6105s in there, which are kind of similar to vintage tall frets, but the vintage short ones, the small ones that you might see on other guitars, I avoid them at all costs. They just don't feel good to play. They wear out fast, and it's just another expense that you'll actually get if you play guitar over any extended period of time. So yeah, anything other than traditional vintage frets are usually pretty good. So medium jumbo 6105s or even the vintage tall ones are better than the standard vintage ones. Coming in at number 1 is something that isn't always a deal breaker, but it is on the most part for me personally, and that's the neck shape. I got pretty big hands, and what I really love about a Fender or a Gibson from the 50s are those sort of profile necks. Now, traditionally, even in the 1950s, not all the necks back then were super fat, but it's something that I just got used to. Now, the neck on this guitar is a U-shaped neck from Fender, and it's really, really big. This is the original series Tele, and I really love this, but this is about as big as I'll ever go. It's actually larger than some of the 50s profile necks I've got on, say, my Tokai Love Rock, or even my 52 reissue Telecaster. The neck on this is nice and chunky. But it's not always a deal breaker, because sometimes you play guitars that just feel and sound great and tick all the boxes, even though they don't meet your expectations. And what changed my mind on that was this. This is the PRS SE. It's got a wide, thin neck, which is the exact opposite of the one you just saw. But I gotta tell you, man, it feels great to play, so I don't allow that to sort of really bother me in any ways anymore if it plays as well as it does. So one other thing I'm gonna add to this number 1 is access up the fretboard. I like a guitar where I can actually play as high as you like, even if it's only got 22 frets or 24, Doesn't matter, I want to be able to get up most of the way without struggling. And that's not the case for all the guitars I've played in my life, or even some of that I've played recently from Dan Electro. So for me personally, I like a guitar that just feels great in the hand. Usually a fatter neck over a thinner one, but if it's something like this where the neck doesn't really fit my requirement, but it still ticks all the boxes in terms of playability, tone, simplicity, weight, and all of that balance and all those kind of things, it still gets the thumbs up. So that's not always a deal breaker, but there you go. All right, so there you have it. That's my top 10 things I look for in an electric guitar that aren't always deal breakers. Let me know in the comments what you think about this list and whether or not you'd have a couple that you'd like to add to it as well. Overall, they're the things I think about the most anytime I'm buying a new guitar. The biggest deal breaker for me is the fret size. I can't stress that enough. If they're really, really small frets and they're almost unplayable or they're gonna wear out quickly, I don't buy it because I know the way that I play with using a bit of force, and if it's a guitar I'm gonna love and play a lot, they're just not going to stand the test of time. But I can, of course, accommodate to some of the other variables on the guitar if they tick a lot of the other boxes on this list. So that's just my list. I get asked this a lot. What do I look for in an electric guitar? So there you go. I hope it's been helpful. If it was, please give it a thumbs up. I'll catch you on the next video. See ya.